So I'm Karen Fildes. I'm working at the University of Wollongong in the graduate medicine. It's a school of medicine, so we teach young would-be doctors, and it's a postgraduate degree, so those guys have done a degree already and then they've got into medicine. So their medical degree is 4.5 years, and I teach them about cell and molecular biology, biochemistry, things that young medical students don't like. So I started out in the School of Biological Science because I started out as an environmental scientist and then have moved across into human health over the years. It's been a long, convoluted journey. Originally, when I got into university in the first place, I got into law, or I could do a Bachelor of Arts. And I wanted to do science, but I didn't actually have the mathematics because I didn't do maths in my HSC. And at the time, you needed your mathematics to get a science degree. But I really was always very passionate about biology, and I love biology. So I decided I didn't want to do law. I made the decision based on the fact that I didn't want to study books. I wanted to study the earth. And so that's how I started. I just decided I'll do a Bachelor of Arts, try my hardest to get through it and try and get into science sideways, which succeeded, obviously. I did science in the first place because of my passion for animals, plants and animals, and Australia. I love Australia. So I wanted to do something to help protect it. I was in love with Diane Fossey from Gorillas in the Mist and Jane Goodall. Huge inspiration because they're just so incredibly fearless with what they did, and they still blow me away. I can't even believe living in the jungle in Rwanda and you know, just fighting people single-handedly and changing the way we perceive primates forever and a day. You know, those 3 primate researchers that started in the 70s, they were I loved the idea of that. Never made it to Africa to do research, but you don't need to, there's plenty of good stuff in Australia. The way to describe my research now is trying to solve problems using design-based methodology. And so design-based methodology is a way of trying to figure out what people want or people need. And it's been going for 100 years, and Coca-Cola and all those other big corporations have been using it forever and a day, quite effectively, as you can imagine. But we haven't been utilising that to solve problems in health and for social equity, or to figure out what kind of an environment people want to live in, how they want their children schooled. So these sort of design research methodologies, which have been used by big corporations, are now being adopted in health to design health services, not for profit, but for the benefit of the humans that use them. Rather than being directed by the people working in the service, we're now trying to change our focus around and design a health service with consultation with the people who use it. So we want them to be designing the service, not the health professionals designing the service. So changing that perspective from we're going to do it for you to we're going to do it with you. Whether you're doing quantitative research or qualitative research. In quantitative research, you have to collect evidence, and then you have to come up with a generalisation based on that evidence that you've collected, and you put forward an explanation for the phenomenon that you've measured or observed. Well, that's exactly the same thing when we're trying to design a new way of helping people lose weight, for example. Well, it's collecting the evidence. What are the problems? Why? Like, we know the science of weight loss. Eat less, do more exercise. Don't consume more energy than you can spend. But we also know that that doesn't make any difference on the ground, that we're getting fatter and fatter by the minute, that we're probably more likely to die of overeating than undereating for the first time in the history of humankind. So we know the science behind weight gain and weight loss, but it's not making a difference on the ground. So we have to use the science and then extend it with finding out what the actual problems are in the community. So we're using our scientific methodology to figure out what the community thinks about this science and then putting it all together. So you need a mixed methods approach to do the kind of work that I'm doing now. When we're talking about deductive reasoning, then I'm saying, I've got some leaves out there and there's a lot of holes in them, and I see a whole bunch of bugs around that tree. So I think that those bugs are making the holes in those leaves. So I'm going to set up a series of experiments and I'm going to exclude all the variables around that to really find out if it is those bugs that are causing the hole in the leaves. So that's deductive. I'm deducing the problem. I'm trying to figure out what's happening, and I've come up with a hypothesis that I'm going to test. Inductive is when you can see a phenomenon, but you're not going to say, I think it's this. You're going to sit back and observe and take notes and collect lots and lots and lots of data. And you're not going to think that it's the bugs making the holes in the leaves. You're just going to watch and watch and watch, take notes, think about it, have a look around at all the trees, all the leaves, and then you actually come up with your generalization from your notes. So you're not actually designing an experiment and deducing the reason. You're letting it happen and observing it and using your data to come up with the reason. So that's inductive. So you're getting it out of the data rather than collecting the data. Let's use an example of one of the projects. So one of the projects that I'm working on at the moment is working with disadvantaged pregnant women who are overweight or obese, and how can we come up with a way to better support them to make healthier choices, so then therefore the babies that they're about to have will also then benefit from that, because then they will be taught healthy choices. So we all know what healthy choices are, but we don't really know why a vast majority of our population aren't taking them up. So we will interview a group of women at the beginning before they've had their baby, so in their first trimester, and we'll get an idea of what they think of healthy choices in their diet, and we'll listen and talk, and it'll be a big conversation, and then we'll do it again 3 months later, and then 3 months later after that. And then hopefully we'll come up with a program that'll better support them. But we can't possibly do any of that without justifying our reason to do it. So when we're doing a project at the university, we have to get ethics approval. So you can't just decide to do some research and go do it. You've got to justify the need. So the literature is actually you investigating the literature, supporting your argument that this is a need, that disadvantaged pregnant women need support. There's got to be 50 studies beforehand doing something that's identifying the fact that you've got to do the work that you've got to do. And so then the ethics will evaluate that and say, yeah, this is a need. You can go and talk to disadvantaged pregnant women if they agree and if they want to be part of this project. But they wouldn't let you do that just for the sake, because you've got some curiosity and you think it could be this. You have to have evidence to prove that this is there's a need there. We might do our pilot studies. So our pilot study might be done with, say, a university student needs to do a small research project as part of their course. And so we collaborate with that student. They would come along and say, oh, what kind of things are you doing? And then we say, oh, well, we're doing this. Why don't you come along and do that? And then they do. And they would collect a small amount of data over a shorter period of time. And if that data showed up 0, and remember our dean always used to say, 0 is still a data point, don't stress if you get 0. But if it came up with 0 and you really weren't finding anything, then you probably wouldn't pursue it, because you would be hard pushed to justify that project to a funding body or to ethics, because they're going to say, you've done the pilot study and the pilot study showed up nothing, so why are you pursuing this? It's really mandatory before anybody's going to allow you to do the research in the first place. Pilot studies are also good because they often take you in another direction that you didn't anticipate. Something comes out of it and you go, whoa, I didn't think of that. And then you might take everything in a different direction. But if you put all these funding and resources and time into your idea of what the answer is going to be, and then you find out, oh, that's not the answer at all. It's a lot of investment that goes down the drain. So the pilot study helps you sort of put a little bit in, find out what's going on, choose your direction. In this data collection age, big data is the catchphrase, right? So everybody's using big data. And that's because with the internet, we're collecting a whole bunch of data every single day, and it's getting stored. So if people agree to using that data for research purposes, then we do. So when you've got big data, you need special servers to store the data on. They've got to be super, super, super secure. And generally, you'll always have a statistician on the team to guide how you might analyse that data. And usually those guys will be epidemiologists. So epidemiology is studying whole populations of what's happening in the whole of Australia with regards to health and disease. And so they'll be statisticians like PhDs statisticians with PhDs. And then you'll also have the people who collected the data, which might be a pathology lab. So you might have gone in to take bloods and you've signed a form to say, yeah, sure, you can use these numbers from my bloods for research purposes. And then so for example, in overweight and obesity studies, you might be able to figure out what areas in, say, our region's Illawarra, what areas should we target? And so you can get that data from a pathology lab, like who's got the highest blood sugar levels, who's got the highest triglycerides in their bloods, what areas in Wollongong should we target? Low socioeconomic areas, high socioeconomic areas. So you'll analyse all that data to find out where you might want to target the most resources, or you'll be doing that in collaboration with a statistician, and massive data packages that help you analyse that, because they're big. That's why they call it big data. You cannot get funding for research or even ethics approval without some evidence that you're collaborating with a wide variety of people. It can't just be because you've got an idea and you want to pursue it. You've got to show that this is important, it needs to be done. I've talked, for example, in that project, I've got psychologists on that project. I've got nutrition and dietetics on that project. We've got medical doctors on that project. And then we've got me, I'm a scientist on that project. So there's a wide variety of disciplines there, because you need all those perspectives to broaden your data collection approach. And teamwork is, nothing happens without it, nothing. So you're only as good as your collaborations. With one of the obesity studies that we're doing, the way we came across that was, as I said before, a student who did a research project. And she was interviewing GPs about how they feel about addressing someone who comes in and their child is overweight or obese. Like, how do you feel about bringing that up? That's a difficult thing to bring up, but you're actually obligated to bring it up. So how do you do that? So in that small pilot study, what we found was, well, we understand that we've got to bring it up, and we do have to bring it up, but there's all these complications, because obviously it's an emotional study. It's an emotional thing to discuss. So while they said, yeah, sure, I'm confident, once we teased the data apart and analysed their responses, we could see they're not confident at all, and there's all this insecurity around actually confronting a parent in that situation. So because we could analyse those responses that way, that meant that we could target the next step of the study to that particular situation. So then that's when we bring in the psychologists and nutritionists, because we say, oh, well, they're much more confident. What can they do to better support the GPs? So that little bit of data that we analysed actually ended up determining the direction of the rest of the study. Science communication, that's a big passion of mine, because to date, or up until the last 5 years, I think we've done it incredibly badly, except David Attenborough did it really, really well. He wasn't a scientist, he was just interpreting everybody's science. But the kick with my research is that we're trying to not only design our approaches with the people who are being affected by that approach, but we're also considering them to be co-researchers, if you like. So if we're doing an investigation into chronic kidney disease, and we're talking to patients, families and their carers about their disease and how it impacts their life, which it impacts their life enormously on many different levels, we're constantly exchanging knowledge. We're not delivering knowledge. We're not saying, oh, we found this out here. This is what it's like to have chronic kidney disease, and this is what you have to do. We're exchanging all the time in our consultation processes. So we have workshops, we come up with their ideas, with their perceptions, what their problem is, what their patient journey, how that works, and then we feed it back to them and say, well, what do you think of this? and then they might come back and go, no, and then it'll come back. So it's a very much a collaborative process, this kind of research, this design-based research. It's not going to work unless you feed back. Here's our draft, what do you think? Okay, back to the drawing board. Here's our second draft, what do you think? So in that situation, we're in collaboration with the users. Then of course we go to conferences, so then the conferences are more targeted towards fellow professionals who are interested in doing those same kinds of things. And that's the way you get ideas for new projects, because you talk to people and you say, hey, you want to collaborate with me? And then Canada's talking to Australia, who's talking to New Zealand, and we've got these international collaborations being built. That often happens from attending conferences in your professional discipline. And then the other way we disseminate our information is in journal articles, and that again is just targeting the people who are doing the research. They're not targeting the people who are using the research. So if you want to target and communicate with the people who need to use the results of the research, then that needs to happen via community consultation, radio, more general online. There's some great science journalist, I don't know what you call them, websites, and they report lots and lots of different things that are happening. And of course, podcasts now. Podcasts are great. So I haven't done podcasts, but I want to one day. So there's more than two. There's myriad of approaches to pursuing a career in science. But if you were absolutely passionate about medical science, then do medical science. If you're absolutely passionate about the planet, then you can do any science, because just about every science has got something to help the planet. If you're passionate about problem solving, again, it doesn't matter what kind of science you do. For me, it was always going to be the life sciences, because chemistry, physics, while I have deep respect and I actually teach biochemistry, it doesn't light my fire. And so if something doesn't light your fire, you're not going to put the time and effort into it, because you're just not going to be passionate about it. So it's kind of whether you're passionate about problem solving, then it's science, and it doesn't matter what science, whichever one suits you, whichever one lights your fire. But if you're passionate about medicine, or you're passionate about animal zoology, or you're passionate about little tiny microorganisms, then you pursue that. And you just stick with what you love, and don't pigeonhole yourself too much. And remember that everything about successful work, no matter what you do, successful work is completely and utterly reliant on collaborations. So if you can't relate to people, and you can't problem solve with people, and you can't back down and compromise, and you can't respect other people's opinions and cultures and ways of knowing, being and doing, then it doesn't matter how good you are at science, you won't succeed, because we're living in a global world and we need to be able to communicate and relate in a really big variety of ways. And the only way you can really learn how to do that is to get out in the world and have fun and talk to people. And if you're stuck inside reading books all the time, then when you get to the point where you have to build collaborations, you won't be able to. So well-rounded, boys and girls.